I'm going to show you how to create a lyric video using typography animation in After Effects. The technique I'm going to show you will enable you to create a few different animations and then reuse them using the Essential Graphics feature. This will allow you to create a bespoke look while saving you a bunch of time. The song I'll be using is a royalty-free track, and I'll post a link to it down below. You can either follow along using that track or just adapt the lesson to your own lyrics. So let's get started. We are going to be recreating 4 of the animations you saw in the intro. The project files are available in the description for free. If you're feeling lazy and just want to download the full pack of 20 animations ready-made, you can get them as well for a small price. Otherwise, you can follow along on this tutorial and we can work through it together. So the first thing we want to do is create a solid for the background. So let's press Layer, New, Solid, and make sure that the hex code is dark grey, like 181818, and let's call this BG for background. Let's lock this layer. Now let's create a text element by using the type tool, and I'm going to type motion, but you can type in whatever you want. And I'm going to use the align tab to center this element. I'm going to use the paragraph tab to choose center text, and I'm going to hold Control and double click the pan behind tool to center the anchor point at the center of the text layer. Now I'm going to scale this layer up a little bit. You can use any font you want, but I am currently using Barlow Condensed Extra Bold. And I'm going to make sure there's a white fill and 0 border. You should make sure that the composition duration is set to 1 second. This is going to be quite a quick animation. Now I want you to select this middle text layer and press Ctrl D twice to create 2 duplicates. I want you to move one slightly below and one slightly above. Let's rename this bottom one text inner bottom. And let's rename this one to text upper bottom. And let's give these layers a different color by selecting both of them and choosing a layer color, just to keep everything neat and tidy. Now I want these 2 text layers to have no fill but a thin stroke. So let's go to the character tab, let's select no fill color, and let's type in a stroke value of 0.3. Now I want to create 2 more text layers, so click this center text again and duplicate it twice again. And let's move one off screen to the bottom and move another one off screen at the top. Now let's rename this top one to text outer top, and let's rename this one here to text outer bottom. And let's click both of these and give them a unique color as well. Now let's start animating. So let's select all 4 text layers that we've just made, excluding the middle text here. Press P to bring up their position keyframes. Move your playhead to the start of the composition and add a position keyframe. Now at the start, I want these inner text layers to be slightly more out, so let's move them down a bit and up a bit here. Now let's move to, say, 10 frames in, and let's move them down closer to the center text, about here. So the movement should go something like this. For the bottom layer, let's grab this position keyframe by highlighting it and pressing Ctrl C, and then pasting it into the position of this text outer bottom. So now we have this movement. And now let's do the same with the top layers. So I'm going to grab at 10 frames the position of this text upper bottom, Ctrl C, and paste it onto text outer top. And now you have this movement. Now we only want this middle text to appear at 10 frames in. So let's move our playhead to 10 frames. Let's drag the start of this to our playhead. So we actually want to keyframe the fill and stroke of this middle text layer so that it can start off with no fill and stroke and then change. So let's twirl down this layer, click on this animate button and add a stroke width property. Let's click this animate button again and add a fill color opacity property. Let's add 2 keyframes for these values. Now let's move the playhead back 1 frame. Change the fill opacity to 0 and the stroke width to 0.3. Move the playhead forward 1 and you should be able to see that it changes from no fill to fill. Now I want to speed up the start of this animation slightly. So let's grab these keyframes at 10 frames in and drag them to 5 frames. And let's drag this middle text layer forward a bit. Now when the fill and stroke change for this center layer, we want these outer elements to disappear. So let's highlight all of them and drag their endpoints to our playhead. So then we have something like this. And let's move our playhead to 10 frames and press N, so we set the end of our composition here, and then we play. So now that we've finished the animation, we can focus on trying to make the animation customizable and reusable. So in order to do that, we're going to use the Essential Graphics panel. So if you come up to Window, Essential Graphics, make sure your composition name is selected in this drop-down. Now we're going to twirl down the motion layer and find the source text property. And we're going to drag it into the Essential Graphics panel. Let's rename this property to Lyric. Now, if we create a parent composition by selecting new composition and just type in parent and press enter, and then we drag our composition into this parent comp. Now we twirl it down, you should see essential properties. If you twirl that down, here is the lyric property that we created. So if we change this to something else, like bananas, and press OK, nothing changes at the start, but then this element changes. So we need to make it so this essential property changes every single text element, not just this final one. So let's go back into our composition, and we want to link the source text of all the other text layers to this source text. So to do that, let's twirl down any one of the other text layers. Let's choose this one here, twirl down text. Where this source text property is, we want to grab this pick whip here and drag it to the source text property of the main motion text. This expression that is added means that this layer's source text will always be equal to this layer's. And now we want to do the same for all the other layers. The quick way to do that is to select the source text property, press edit, copy expression only, highlight the other text layers, edit, and paste. Now if we go back out to the parent layer, all of the text layers have changed to bananas. For the next example, add in another grey solid, change your composition duration to 1 second. Let's add in another text element. We want this to be between 3 and 5 words would work. I'm going to choose by your side, if I can spell. There we go. We're going to center it, double click pan behind while holding control to set the anchor point to the center. We're going to scale it up. And we want to start off with no fill, but some border. So if we go to the character panel, you can see here I've got 0.3 pixel border and no fill. Now we want the fill to come in word by word. So let's twirl down this text layer and click this animate button and add in a fill color opacity property. So now we've got a block fill here. You can see here it's added an animator 1 property and a range selector and then the fill opacity. So we're going to twirl down this range selector here, and we can use this to control the fill on the text. So for example, if we drag this end property back, you can see it's removing the fill. We want this to happen word by word rather than character by character. So if we twirl down the advanced property and we change this based on characters to based on words, now if we twirl this end property, you see it's doing each word one by one. I don't want this fade to be happening, so I'm going to change the smoothness to 0. And now it just goes instantly word by word. Let's bring the end property down to 0. And we're going to animate the start property from 0 to 100. So if we add a keyframe on the start property from at 0, and we go to 1 second, and we change this to 100, and we play the animation, you can see it fills in each word one by one. And you can imagine in the song, each word would fill in at the time in which the person's saying it. Now to make this customizable and reusable, we're going to open the Essential Graphics panel by going to Window, Essential Graphics, and we're going to select from the drop-down our composition. We're going to grab the source text property from the layer we created and drag it into the Essential Graphics panel. And let's change the name of the property to Lyric. And now you can see here if we change this to anything else, like motion is fun, it's going to update and the animation still works. We could have a problem if we create a sentence that's too long, like motion is fun for everyone. You can see part of it's now going off screen. So to fix this, we can also add the scale property of this element to the Essential Graphics panel. So if we go down to our layer here and we press S to bring up the scale, and we drag the scale property into the Essential Graphics panel, and let's leave it named as scale. And now you can also change the scale of the layer. So now if we play, you can see it still works fine. If we wanted to have more words, we scale it down. If we wanted to have less words, like motion fun, we can then scale it up. For the next animation, we've added a dark grey solid in again. We're now going to add in another text layer. Let's just type Holmes motion, or whatever you want to type. Let's center it and center the anchor point. Let's go to the character panel and make sure that we have a white fill with no stroke. Let's scale it up slightly. Now we're going to twirl down the text layer. We're going to click this animate property and we're going to add a tracking property. And the tracking is just the spacing between the letters like this. So let's add a keyframe for 0 tracking and drag it to frame 8. Now let's add a keyframe for 100 tracking at frame 0. So then the tracking decreases like this. Now we're going to animate the scale. So let's add a scale keyframe at frame 0 and scale it up quite a lot. Now let's move to frame 8 and copy and paste that scale keyframe at frame 8. And then at frame 12, shrink it down to about there. So let's add some easing to these keyframes. I'm going to highlight the tracking amount keyframes and press F9 to add some easing. And we're going to go into the graph editor here and change the easing to an extreme kind of easing like this. And we're going to add some easing to the scale keyframes as well. So let's highlight all of those and press F9 and go into the graph editor. And let's tweak these handles as well. Maybe slightly less extreme. There we go. Now, as a final touch, we're going to twirl down the text layer again. We're going to press the animate button again, and we're going to choose opacity. Then it's added an animator 2 property here with a range selector and an opacity property. So let's twirl down the range selector and let's open advanced and let's select randomize order. Now let's keyframe this end property. Let's set a keyframe at the start of the composition for 100% and at 1 second in, let's set a keyframe for 0%. And then we have something like this. So this is fading in characters in a random order. I actually don't like this specific random order. So down here, I'm going to alter the random seed to a different number. Now we should get a different sequence. I also want to turn off the smoothness and I'm going to speed this up by moving the final keyframe back to 16 keyframes. I still don't like this order, so I'm going to change the seed again. Actually, some smoothness wouldn't hurt. You can decide for yourself whether you want the smoothness on or off. Now, to make this animation reusable, we're going to do the same process we did for the previous animation. We're going to open the essential graphics. We're going to select our composition from the drop-down. We're going to drag our source text into essential graphics, and then we're going to rename the name of the property to lyric. And now we can type whatever we want into here. And the animation still works. Now before we added this scale property to the essential graphics, but because we've added keyframes here, that's not really doable. So instead, we're going to add a null, layer, new, null. We're going to parent this text layer to the null. We'll call this null scalar. And we're going to press S to bring up its scale property, and we're going to add that to the essential graphics. And now we can change the scale, and all of the keyframes scale proportionally. If we just wanted pancakes, we can scale that up, and the animation scales appropriately. Okay, so let's add a dark grey solid here with a hex code of 181818. Let's add in a text field, and let's type motion. Let's align it to the center. Hold Control and double click the pan behind tool to set the anchor point to the center of the text. Let's grab the scale of this layer and scale it up a little bit. Let's twirl down this text layer, click the animate button and add a scale property. And it's added an animator 1 layer here with a range selector, and here's our scale property in here. So let's add another property to this animator 1. Click this add button here, select property and position. So now we have two properties here, position and scale, being controlled by this range selector. So this range selector allows you to select certain characters within your text and then apply this position and scale to just those characters. For example, if we want to grab the first character, let's grab this end property and bring it back so that it's maybe 10%. So now you can see here these red lines are indicating that just this M is being selected. Now let's uncheck this constrain proportions for the scale so we can just change the horizontal scaling. And let's just ramp it up massively to like 800. And let's move the position of it back left so you can see it's just moving the M. And now let's do the same for the final character. So let's duplicate this animator 1 by clicking it and pressing Ctrl D. And now you can see we've got an animator 2. Let's twirl it down. Twirl down the range selector. And now let's select the final character instead of the first one. So let's start at 90% and end at 100%. And let's tweak the position. That looks about right. Let's open the advanced for this animator too, and we're going to keyframe this amount property. You can see if you drag the amount property back and forward, it controls the position and scale both that we've just animated. So let's add a keyframe for the amount property at 100%. And now let's go to 1 second in our timeline and let's add a keyframe for 0%. And let's do the same for animator 1. Now we have this animation. So to view these keyframes in a more tidy way, I'm just going to click on this layer, press U, which brings up only the keyframed properties. So we have our 2 amount properties here. So let's add some easing to our keyframes, highlight them, press F9. So you could leave it there, but I'm going to also animate these scale. So I'm going to add a keyframe at the start, and then at 1 second in, I'm going to scale it up. And we're going to also add some easing to these keyframes by pressing F9. And now let's add some custom easing by highlighting all of these keyframes and going to the graph editor. Let's box select these end keyframes and drag the handle to the left. So it's going to start off quickly and then ramp down slowly. And we have this kind of animation. And there's so many variations you can do with this kind of animation. If you come back down to the advanced properties, you could change the units property to index, which allows you to select specific characters like the 5th character, the 1st character, the 8th character, rather than in percentage. You can add some smoothness, you can add some more easing here. You could animate any property for the characters, not just position and scale. So now we're going to make this reusable. We're going to open up the Essential Graphics panel. We're going to choose our composition from the drop down, and we're going to add our source text in there. And let's try changing it to something else, like pancakes. And let's add the scale. Again, because we've keyframed the scale, we'll have to add a null in. And we'll have to parent our text layer to the null. Grab the null, open its scale property, and drag this scale property into the Essential Graphics panel. Now let's scale it down for pancakes. And that still works. Okay, so I'm going to drag our audio track into the composition. Again, you can download this audio track from the link in the description, or you can use your own track. And now I'm going to start crafting the lyric video using these 4 animations that we've made and customizing them. So the first line is, so I'm going to drag in this second animation we made, and I'm going to twirl down the layer, twirl down essential properties, right click this lyric property that we made, edit value, and let's type in life is harder. And then it looks like this. Speed it up slightly. I'm going to right click, time stretch, maybe 60 as the stretch factor. I want it to just hold at the end, so I'm going to right click the composition, time, freeze on last frame. Drag the end of the composition to about here. Now the next line is, then I like to think. So we're going to use maybe this first animation that we made. We're going to twirl down the essential properties again and change the lyric to than I like. We want it to hold a bit longer, so I'm going to freeze the last frame again. And set the endpoint to here. And the next line is to think. So I'll use the 4th animation that we worked on. And I'll change the essential properties to think. And again, I want to hold on the last frame for a little bit, so I'm going to freeze on last frame. And then the next one is but it's easy. So now I'll use the 3rd animation we made, and the line is but it's easy. So I'll just do the rest of the animation like we're doing here, and I'll speed it up for you. For the first 7 seconds of the lyric video. Life is harder than I like to think, but it's easy when you're by my side. We can also add some extra animation to these compositions to bring it to life a bit more. So for example, instead of this first layer disappearing when the next layer comes in, we could instead scale it down. So let's add some keyframes for the scale property. I'm going to disable constrained proportions. I'm going to add a scale keyframe. And as this second lyric is coming in, I'm going to make this 0 on the Y scale. And then maybe add some smoothing. Something like that, maybe speed it up a little bit.
Life is harder than I like to think.
And then with this guy, maybe I can animate the rotation. Press Y or select the pan behind tool. I'm going to set the anchor point to the bottom left. We're going to make it rotate out like this. And add some smoothing, F9.
But it's easy when you're by.
Here I've actually used 2 copies of one of the animations we made, one on top of the other.
Easy when you're by my side.
So even when you only have a few animations, if you use them creatively, you can still get that very bespoke feel. The viewer might not even notice that a lot of the animations are repeating. Obviously, we've only done 4 animations. The more animations you do, the much more bespoke it's going to look. So let's just watch it through once more.
Life is harder than I like to think. But it's easy when you're by my side.
And then you can always spice it up and make it look even nicer by adding some texture to the background, and I've added some subtle dust on top as well, just to give it that professional look. I hope you've learned something from this video about typography animation and the essential graphics feature. Let me know down below. I'd love to see what you guys can create using these techniques. Again, if you want the full pack of 20 animations, check out the link in the description. Please like the video guys, it helps me out so much, and as always, see you on the flippity flop.